Okay, so we are picking up with where we left off on Friday, which was kind of in the middle of John Donne's Batter My Heart, which we'll finish rather quickly. So this is on 1050, page 1050 in the 11th edition. I think we left off right around line 7 or 8. Let's start with the beginning of line 7. Reason your viceroy in me should defend, but as captive it proves weak or untrue. And I was talking about last week, viceroy. Everything started spinning. Viceroy means essentially king in place of, or if you want, in place of the king. Reason is standing in place of God as the king of the human soul, so to speak, all right? In place of not replacing, but standing in God's stead, acting like steward. And he's saying, the speaker is saying, reason, your justice minister, so to speak, in me should defend me, but is proved either weak, that is ineffectual, or is untrue, that is a traitor to me or in me against you. So, we get the last 6 lines. Yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Would be loved fain, would be loved in return. Okay? So, I love you and I want to be loved in return, but I'm betrothed, I'm engaged to your enemy. So, last 4 lines. 2 lines and then a couplet. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I. So, divorce me means you effectuate a divorce between me and the one that has usurped me. Okay? Untie what? Next line. Or break that knot again. Untie that knot. What's the knot? The knot that ties the speaker, again, to the usurping power or usurping authority. The enemy of the one, that the speaker is addressing, God. Take me to you. Take me away from this. Take me out of here. Rescue me. All kinds of Old Testament, imagery of the Hebrews, Israelites being rescued out of bondage, etc. Take me to you. Imprison me. Why imprison? I mean, the speaker is saying, I am enthralled to your enemy, and saying imprison me is saying, make me enthralled to you instead. It's St. Paul, throughout St. Paul's letters, and bear in mind, Donne, about the same time, was writing theological stuff also, and within 5 or 10 years at most, became an Anglican priest. St. Paul talks about becoming the slave of God, becoming slaves to God, and it's a paradox. And in becoming slaves, or in becoming a slave of God, that's when he finds true freedom. All right? So, take me to you, imprison me, for I. The for is because. Because I, except you enthrall me, that is, unless you make me your slave, God, I will never be free. And there's that paradox. How can be a slave and yet be free? Okay? Nor ever chaste. Chaste here has that meaning of sexually pure, but it also has the meaning that is used in Hamlet. When Hamlet's talking to Ophelia in Act 3, Scene 1, after the to be or not to be speech, he asks her, are you fair? Are you honest? Okay? And chastity comes up, and the word chaste implies truthfulness. It implies honesty. So I will never be chaste, truthful, honest, except you ravish me. What's meant by ravish? We seldom use that word today. it has two meanings. One, to take control of. Two, to remove. Take control of is a euphemism. Okay? There's a very famous article, famous among Donne scholars, written in the late 70s, early 80s. I can't remember which year. Titled, and the author titled it this for shock value, Donne's Divine Rapist. Because ravish in Donne's day did also mean rape. I mean, that's taking control of. All right? Donne's divine rapist. I shall, he said, the speaker says, never be chaste except unless you take me entirely, body and soul. All right? So, think of both these meanings, or if you want rape, I shall never be sexually pure unless you sexually what? Take me wholly. You can't get any more rapey than that, okay? The other meaning, ravish though, because bear in mind, has both meanings. And look, to remove. To remove what? To remove me from this situation. I will never be what? Wholly yours unless you take me totally. That is, both take me, okay, and remove me from down here in this, place of sin, so to speak. So notice how the beginning of the poem is kind of rhetorically paralleled at the end of the poem. Batter my heart. What's the speaker saying in that open quatrain? Destroy me. Why? To make me new. And at the end, it's essentially destroy me, to make me new. Go from there to 1054, Pied Beauty. This is Gerard Manley Hopkins. Talked about the other day with his other poem. And my mind just do a total blank. It's somewhere on here. God's grandeur, man. Pied Beauty. Pied means varied or variable. It means not mixture, wide variety of, okay? So, pied beauty, wide variety of beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire cold chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades, their gear and tackle trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim. He fathers forth whose beauty is past change, praise him. Everything discussed in here is about shifting of variability. So dappled things. Dappled usually refers to color and light. Like if you were to walk outside under these trees, you would see dappled light because there would be parts of it that were in shade and parts of it that were bright. Okay? Skies of couple colors of brinded cow. Rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim. That is, you don't see a trout, he's not talking about a trout, that's just one color. It's like a rainbow trout. Variation of color. Fresh, fire cold chestnut falls. Why? Chestnuts are like snowflakes. No two are the same. Every one is slightly different. That's the entire poem is talking about those slight differences that create such variation that we wake up and go, wow, what an amazing world. Rather than this room, right? Because all of these rooms, everywhere in Peck, are like this. There's not a lot of variation there, right? Go on from there to, that's Pied Beauty. 847. Go to an American poet. Late 19th century. Emily Dickinson. You got a whole big long section on her. There's a introduction to her on 829 and following. Introduction to her background, etc. 847, I said. So we're going to do, I think, only two poems by her. Most of her poems are fairly short. They are lyrics, that is, there's an expression of emotion and tone of the speaker, not necessarily of the author. Dickinson was a bit eccentric. She was somewhat of a recluse. Many of her poems were discovered in her home after her death, written on scraps of paper and things like that. And one thing you'll notice immediately in looking at any of them, she uses the dash a lot, probably indicating a pause or a slight shift in thinking, but not necessarily. And she writes about odd topics. For example, we're not going to read it, but look at the poem on 846. I heard a fly buzz, dash, pause, when I died. Just read it for fun later on. So, because I could not stop for death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tall. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. So, 6 stanzas, sorry. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. Why couldn't the speaker stop for death? Notice, not because I did not because I chose not to, because I could not. How many of us know when we're going to die? None of us. We go about our daily lives, assuming for the moment the person is quote unquote somewhat healthy. We go about our daily lives thinking, I've got this to do. The speaker couldn't stop for death, so what happened? Death knocked on the door. He kindly stopped for me, notice. Death is portrayed almost here. I once heard this described, professor, a long time ago, as death is like a gentleman caller. Okay, this is the 19th century. 1863 is when this is probably written. So, towards the end of the Civil War, there's a great film from the 1930s based on a book from the 1930s set in the South, Gone with the Wind, and it has a portrayal of your quintessential gentleman caller, and that's the character Rhett Butler, played by Clark Gable. I always use the example of do a YouTube search for Rhett Butler. This is what death is being portrayed as. Not because she's familiar with it, she obviously isn't, but she's portraying death not as the Grim Reaper, the guy who's coming behind you with the hood and the cowl and the sickle, he's going to take your knees out from under you. Not like that at all. Notice, he stopped for me. The carriage held just ourselves, pause, and immortality. Why and immortality? Notice, it's not eternity. Eternity is outside of timeness. Immortality is not dying forever. Okay? Death stopped for the speaker. The speaker died. So what is going on into immortality? The soul, probably. We slowly drove. Why slowly? What are you in a hurry for once you're dead? He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too. Why labor and leisure? Work and not work, laziness. What does the speaker have to do when dead? Nothing. That's why. But why did the speaker put away my labor and my leisure? Because of his civility. It's like death showed up and it just dropped everything. Because death appeared so kindly. Now that could be an implication. I'm not saying it is. Could be an implication that death kind of came as a pleasant surprise. Like the speaker wasn't looking forward to death. That's why I could not stop for death. Too busy, got too much to do. And death just came, and it was kind of like a, finally. All right? We passed the school where children strove at recess. Why are they striving at recess? I mean, strive implies you're working hard. If it's good recess, I remember when my kids were younger, one of the schools they were at temporarily had a, how do I want to describe this? Militaristic kind of recess. Because previous year's state testing scores weren't good enough, the principal at the school had, I think it was the third graders, something like that. When they would have recess, all they could do was walk around a track. They couldn't play, okay? These children aren't doing that though. They're striving at recess where? In the ring. Now, this isn't boxing. This is probably playing what game, I don't know if you guys did when you were younger, do little kids often play in a ring? Goes back to a nursery rhyme. Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes to ashes, we all fall down. What is that an allusion to? That game? It's the plague. It's the Black Death. Okay? The ashes to ashes, in an old form of the rhyme, are atchu to atchu, sneezing, because the plague spreads via droplets. Okay? So they're striving in the ring. We pass the fields of gazing grain. We pass the setting sun. Notice they're moving westward. All right? Or rather, he passed us. So the sun went around the speaker and death. The dews drew quivering and chill. Where does dew draw? What does it draw upon? What does it form upon? Grass. Okay? So the dews drew, formed, quivering and chill. So now the implication is you see grass or a lawn covered with dew in like an early morning. For only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. What's meant by gossamer? Gossamer is very, very thin, light material. But the speaker isn't referring to or isn't suggesting literal fabric. What is the gossamer? It's the dew on the ground. Notice, The gossamer is the speaker's only gown. My tippet, my shawl, only tall. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. So here's the ground, here's the swelling. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. What is being described? No. It's a good guess. It's not a literal house, first of all. It's a grave. The roof and the cornice, the roof, if you go to a cemetery, you don't always have to have that part. But you'll have a headstone, often, and it will sit in either one or two pieces of other stone. This one is the main base. It has to be big enough and heavy enough so that when this is inserted into it, it won't just tip over. Okay? The roof was scarcely visible, probably this. Okay? The cornice, the thing that supports the roof, is in the ground. It can't be seen. Why? Have you ever been to an old cemetery? I mean, there are a couple in Murfreesboro that are 100, 150 years old. There's even one or two private family cemeteries that are 200 years old, from the founders of Rutherford County. But go up in the Northeast, where you'll find cemeteries that are 400 years old, that date from the Puritan times, okay, 1624 and such. I've seen a couple of these graves. Go to Europe, where you can go to cemeteries that are 1,000 years old. The older the grave, the less likely you are to see that. Why? Gravity pushes it down, pulls it down into the ground. Without describing what is happening, what has been happening? Time. But the speaker, notice, is in immortality. Okay? Since then, since when? Since death stopped for me, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward, now we get a different word. We're toward eternity. The horses' heads were directed towards eternity. Eternity is usually defined as endless time, not outside of time. Okay? And as long as they're headed towards eternity, what is the speaker's experience of time? It's timelessness. That's why, since then, it's been centuries, but it seems like it was only yesterday. Okay? I know that he exists, 859. Bottom of 859. Just for a moment, look at the poem just before that. Little 4-line poem. Faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. Notice, faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, that is, perceive, understand. But if you can't perceive and understand, what? It's useful to have a microscope. What does that mean in an emergency? Like to find out the smallness of something? Faith isn't about the smallness of something, it's about the big picture. Okay? Now, I know that he exists. First line, just simple declarative statement. I know that he exists. He is capitalized. Who is he? God. Whenever a pronoun like that is capitalized, it's referring to a divinity of some sort. He, therefore, assume God. Somewhere, in silence, he has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. Notice, God is what? Hiding. He's hid his rare life. Why is it rare? How often do we see or experience it or God? Okay? Very seldom. He's hid it from our gross eyes. Gross doesn't mean, like we've got stuff oozing from them and they're disgusting. Gross means common. Like there's 7 billion people on the planet. Gross eyes. 7 billion sets. 'Tis an instance play. 'Tis, abbreviated form of it is. What is? Whatever the it is, it's going to be not described, delineated in the next few lines. So, 'tis an instance play. 'Tis a fond ambush. Fond has two meanings. They're not necessarily opposites, but they're not very similar. One is foolish. Okay. The other is like affection for. If I'm fond of you, it means I have a feeling for you. I have affection for you. 'Tis a fond ambush. That is, it's either a foolish ambush or it's an ambush of affection. Just to make bliss earn her own surprise. What's bliss? Bliss is like utter joy, utter happiness. Not the kind of happiness you get from a good grade, not the kind of happiness you get from a great job, great marriage, anything down here. It's something that makes you go, it catches your breath, okay? So, 'tis a fond ambush, 'tis an instance play, just to make bliss, notice, earn her own surprise. And that's it's that aha moment that produces bliss. Okay, here's a big metaphorical / intellectual jump. The speaker's not just talking about seeing the most amazing sunset. Or, let's say NASA suddenly announced there's going to be a comet flyby that's going to make the night as bright as the sun. Okay? Most people would go out and go and be amazed at that. This is the kind of surprise that leads to bliss, that leads to death. All right? Several days ago, talking about John Donne's Valediction Forbidding Mourning and the spheres, because he talked about sublunary lover. And I mentioned, and I had written down right here, the idea of the music of the spheres. And that according to, I think it was Pythagoras, if we could hear the sound that those 9 spheres that supposedly are out there that surround the world, that they make in their movement, we would immediately be raptured. I don't mean New Testament-y rapture. I mean, we would leave our bodies and be taken up into total bliss. Okay? So, she's saying, the speaker is saying, there's something that the very surprise of it takes us into total joy and bliss. And that something is play. It's an instance play. It's a fond ambush. So who's doing the play? Who's doing the ambushing? Turn the page. But should the play prove piercing earnest, should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare, would not the fun look too expensive? Would not the jest have crawled too far? Who's doing the playing? The speaker is suggesting it's God. And God used the example of "'Tis an instant play of fond ambush, dish to make bliss, earn her on surprise." It's almost an image of like God as a father with a very young child, a 1-year-old. And that 1-year-old's sitting on the bed or in the crib, and the father has a blanket and does what? Peekaboo. Cover your face, you can see the child through the fabric, and the child, you do that the first time, the child gets a somewhat frightened look. And then you reveal, and you get this huge grin on the child's face. The speaker is suggesting that God, at times, does what to humanity? Peekaboo, I'm here. It gives what? A brief glimpse. But what happens with that brief glimpse? Those who see it, those who experience it, they should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare. The glee, the joy, on the face, glaze, like glaze over, in death's stiff stare. To be what? Shocked, surprised, so that the person's, and that's the facial expression when they die. They're in this frozen state. Why? Because the play proved piercing earnest. Piercing how? To the soul. Would not the fun look too expensive? That is, wouldn't people go, come on, God, you got to quit doing that. Why? Because the Old Testament and the New Testament says no one can see God's face and live. It's like God's gone. And the person dies. Why? Because God wants to kill the person? No. It's to draw that person to him. Okay? Read the Caller. I did not bring my 10th edition. You've got a link for it on your syllabus. Poem by George Herbert. I have no idea why they took it out. Well, I do have an idea, but I won't talk about it. Why they took it out of the 11th edition. Page 1056, then, to a sonnet by Keats. 1056. To one who has been long in city pent. Okay, one thing to understand before we talk about this. Okay, it's written in 1816. London in 1816, the city proper, was not a pretty place to live. Okay? London was heated, up until the mid-20th century at least, entirely by coal fires. So you throw coal in a stove, burn that coal, obviously produces a lot of smoke. London was known for its horrendous air pollution. The very phrase London fog doesn't necessarily refer to the kind of fog, I'm from near San Francisco, the kind of fog you get in San Francisco, the Bay Area, the fog that comes in early off the ocean, early in the morning, and sometimes will just sit in the city all day long, even in summer. It'll be 95 degrees in San Jose, where I'm from, and it could be 55, just 30 miles north in San Francisco, because it's all under a bank of fog. It's not that kind of fog that London fog is named for. It's more the pollution, all right? So this poem is about someone who lives and works daily in London, surrounded by this. Give another example. When I grew up in what is now called Silicon Valley, it wasn't then, we regularly, from late 60s that I remember to the early 80s, very early 80s, would have smog alerts during the summer. Not as bad as LA, 700 miles south of us, but really bad because it's a valley, so it's surrounded by mountains. not a lot of airflow unless heat rises and gets up over the mountains. So there were times when go to the beach or something at Santa Cruz, and we get up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and you would rise above a certain level, and you could look back into the valley, and you couldn't see anything. You could just see the mountain range on the other side, and laying in front of that mountain range would just be brown. Just dark brown. Disgusting. Okay? Like rising up above the clouds in an airplane. That's kind of what he's getting at. To one who has been long in city pent, 'tis very sweet to look into the fair and open face of heaven, to breathe a prayer full in the smile of the blue firmament. Who is more happy when, with heart's content, fatigued he sinks into some debonair lair, into some pleasant lair of wavy grass, and reads a debonair and gentle tale of love and languishment. Notice it's an Italian sonnet divided into an octave, first 8 lines, and a sestet, last 6 lines. Returning home at evening, with an ear catching the notes of Philomel, an eye watching the sailing cloudlet's bright career, he mourns that day so soon has glided by, e'en like the passage of an angel tear that falls through the clear ether silently. So let's look at the sestet. One who's been long in city pent, stuck, bound. It's what? It's sweet to look into the fair and open face of heaven. That is, to see the blue sky. To get out from under the crappy air of London. To breathe a prayer full in the smile of the blue firmament. Now, Keats lived in an area just north of London called the Vale of Heath. All right? You can go to his house today. Called the Vale of Heath. It's a little, real small valley, right? Just north of it, like less than a mile walk. Dame Maggie Smith, Sting, other celebrities live in the Vale of Heath now. Just north of that is a large, wild area called Hampstead Heath. All right? And Hampstead Heath has a big part of it that's just an all grassy area called Primrose Hill that people could go up in Keats' day and lay down on it, and if it was a clear day, that is, if a storm had come through or something, they could look down onto London and see London, but usually they couldn't. So he's talking about going up, the speaker's talking about probably, going up to the heath, laying down in this tall wavy grass, and doing what? Who is more happy when with heart's content, fatigued he sinks into some pleasant lair of wavy grass. With heart's content, that is just kind of lies down in a nice big meadow, looks up the sky, and reads a debonair and gentle tale of love and languishment. We're going to read a tale of love and languishment in just a minute. It's the poem La Belle Dame Sans Merci on the next page. So what happens? Returning home at evening, why? Because he can't stay there in this meadow. He's got to go back home. The implication is, because tomorrow morning, he's got to be back up at work. Returning home at evening with an ear catching the notes of Philomel, that is, making his way back into the city, and he hears this nightingale still out in nature, and his eye catches the sailing cloudlet's bright career. It's blowing across the sky. He mourns that day has so soon glided by. The day has glided by like that cloud is sailing through the sky. Even like the passage of an angel's tear that falls through the clear ether silently. Describe an angel's tear. It's kind of hard. Why? Angels don't have bodies. How do angels produce tears if they don't have tear ducts? Angels' tears are like the ether, term he uses, second to the last word, immaterial. They can't be seen. So what is the speaker saying? The day has passed how? As if it never were. In other words, the speaker makes his or her way back home, and it's like by the time he or she gets home, it's like this brief respite never occurred. Probably because all of the burdens of daily life are back. What does the speaker obviously need? A longer vacation, okay? Now turn to 1057. La Belle Dame Sans Merci, the beautiful lady without mercy, is what that means, all right? And it is exactly a debonair and gentle tale of love and languishment. To languish means to slowly die, to slowly be worn down. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. So if the grass around the lake has withered, and birds aren't singing, guess that's the time of year? Late fall, winter, vegetation has started dying, birds have flown south. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest's done. That makes it even more clear. Fall, harvest is past. It's like November, if not later than that. The squirrel's already stocked up for the winter. I see a lily on thy brow with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. Notice the knight who is loitering at the lake palely, the knight's face is pale. What does the speaker say in lines 9 through, 12? The color is draining away from the knight's face. The knight is going through fall, in other words. It's the season of fall in the night. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too in fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy song. Who's speaking? The knight is. We've had a shift of speakers. In the first 1, 2, 3 stanzas, somebody is addressing the knight. Okay? Beginning with stanza 4, the knight is speaking. Why? What can ail thee, knight at arms? What can ail thee, knight at arms? And so the knight speaks. And he says, I met what? I met a beautiful lady in the meadows. Going back to stanza 4, a fairy's child. So she is a fairy. Hair was long, foot was light, like not literally, but like she kind of floated over the ground. And her eyes were wild. Why wild? Uncontained, uncontrollable, meaning she has a fierce spirit in her. Not fierce meaning angry. Okay? So what did the speaker, the knight, do? I made a garland for her head. Remember the other day we did Passionate Shepherd to His Love by Christopher Marlowe, and the speaker talks about weaving garlands and all the stuff from the natural world for his beloved. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. So he wove these little wreaths to go around her head, around her wrists, and around her waist. She looked at me as she did love and made sweet moan. That she looked at me as she did love, the as is probably implying as if. And the moaning is the speaker not understanding her. It's not the moaning of sexual ecstasy. Okay, that's not happened. He puts her on his horse, and nothing else all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy's song. Why? Okay, so she is on the horse, looking down at him while he's walking, leading the horse. Why doesn't he see anything else? Because he's looking up at her. There's a famous painting of this. We either got it in my office or I've got it at home, of the knight looking at her, and she's on the horse, and she's drop dead gorgeous, and she's doing what? Singing a fairy's song. She's speaking the language of the fairies, which, not being a fairy, he doesn't understand. She found me roots of relish sweet and honey wild and manna dew. Notice, all natural ingredients. And sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. Sure means what? Does it mean certainly? No. It's a hope. Like, and surely she was singing, I love you. People usually say that surely when they're mostly sure, but not 100% sure. She took me to her elfin grot, her cave, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses four. I once had a student write about the beautiful lady without mercy's 4 eyes, not what she has. He kisses each eye twice, okay? And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed on the cold hillside. There he dreamed the last dream he ever had. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Dame Sans Merci hath thee in thrall. The beautiful woman without mercy, without pity, what? Has enslaved you. I think I've mentioned before, back in the Middle Ages, where you have literature about elves, okay? They are often about, or fairies, often about the fairies abducting humans and taking them back off to the fairy world. And many of them are about humans being abducted as sexual slaves for the fairies. So he sees pale kings and princes, warriors, death pale. Why are they death pale? They're dead. I saw their starved lips in the gloam. Gloam means darkness, in the shadow, with horrid warning gaped wide. And I woke and found me here on the cold hillside. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge has withered from the lake and no birds sing. Why? Dying or dead. It's the first person addressing him, addressing someone who's dead. Palely loitering can mean lying dead. And the speaker comes up, how'd you die? And speaks, okay? Go from there to, what do we have? 5 minutes. Dover Beach. We can do Dover. That'll be hard. We'll start it. Make sure, and I may bring this in on Wednesday. Where is that? 674. Dover Beach is by Matthew Arnold. And it's about, I'm going to give you a brief paraphrase. It's about a man and a woman in a hotel on the coast of Dover which overlooks the English Channel. On a clear day, you can see France. And they're there, ostensibly, they're there for a romantic rendezvous. And the guy starts philosophizing. She's lying in bed, and he's looking out the window, and he starts philosophizing. He hears the sound of the ocean. He goes, it makes me think of Sophocles and the Oedipus plays. And count no man happy till he's dead, free of pain at last. Okay? And he launches into this thing about the meaningless of life. But he ends it saying, but we're here, we're together, let's love each other, even though it's meaningless. So imagine being in that situation. Imagine being the woman in that situation. You're down there, you think you're going to have a good time, and this guy starts going all pessimistic on you. It's also, and more importantly, the reason the speaker is pessimist is because the speaker says the sea of faith is gone. Okay? The sea is calm tonight, looking out over the ocean. The tide is full, the moon lies fair upon the straits. The moon's coming up over Europe, and its reflection he can see across the English Channel. On the French coast, the light gleams and is gone. That's what a gleam means, or a glimmer means. It flashes and then disappears. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet is the night air. So the speaker's like saying to somebody else, probably the woman, come, smell the air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen. You hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand. Begin and cease and then again begin. Notice begin, in, that repetition. That's the sound of the waves coming in and going out. Coming in and going out. And this isn't like a Florida beach that's all sand. The beaches around England are often, in many of them, they're rocky. They're smooth pebbles. They don't hurt to walk on because they just constantly come in and out. Begin and cease and then again begin with tremulous cadence slow and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Why the eternal note of sadness? Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. He's saying, this is what prompted Sophocles to write his plays. He heard that sound of the ocean coming in and going out, and coming in and going out. Meaning what? Nothing ever changes. We find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. And so the speaker is now going to listen to the sound and say, and here is the thought that I hear. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and around earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar. Retreating, so the faith is retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. The faith, and he's not saying Christian faith. All faith is what? It's retreating. Okay? We'll stop there and pick up with about that same spot on Wednesday. And I'll warn you, I'm not nothing bad.